Today, we are going on a journey. A journey from the very blueprint of our internal wiring, how we first learned to relate to people, all the way to the practical, everyday tools we can use to build stronger, healthier relationships.
So let me ask you this. Does it ever feel like you're trying your best to connect with someone, but it's like you're both working from totally different instruction manuals? It can be so frustrating, right? Even lonely. But what if I told you that that script was written a long, long time ago, and that understanding where it came from is the key to finally rewriting your interactions? Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into.
So, where does this script even come from? It all starts way back with our very first bonds. These earliest relationships literally create a blueprint, a kind of internal roadmap that ends up shaping how we approach connection for the rest of our lives.
Now, there's a name for this framework, and it's called attachment theory. It originally came from psychologists studying the powerful bond between babies and their caregivers. But here's the fascinating part. They discovered that these patterns, these working models of how relationships are supposed to work, they don't just vanish when we grow up. Oh no. They follow us right into our adult friendships and, yes, our romantic partnerships. And what's really interesting is how these patterns tend to fall into four main styles. It all kind of boils down to your answers to two big questions. How do you see yourself, and how do you see other people? If you have a positive view of both, you likely have a secure attachment. You're pretty comfortable getting close, but you're also cool with your independence. But what if you have a negative view of yourself, but a positive view of others? Well, that can lead to an anxious, preoccupied style, where you might find yourself needing a lot of approval. Now, flip that around. A positive view of yourself, but a more negative view of others? That's the dismissive avoidance style, where independence is king, and intimacy can feel threatening. And finally, if your view of yourself and others is kind of unstable and fluctuates, that's what's called fearful avoidant, where you desperately want to be close to people, but you're also terrified of getting hurt. So how does all this internal wiring actually play out in the real world? Well, it has a huge impact. For some of us, especially if we have one of those insecure attachment styles, it can seriously ramp up the fear of being judged or rejected. It can make something as simple as making small talk feel like an absolutely monumental task. And this brings us to a really important distinction we need to make. Shyness and social anxiety are not the same thing, not at all. Shyness is a personality trait. It's that awkward, tense feeling you might get in a new situation. It's common. Social anxiety, on the other hand, is a mental health condition. It's this intense, overwhelming fear of being judged, of embarrassing yourself, and it can be so powerful that it completely disrupts your daily life.
And when I say intense, I mean it. You can see how it snowballs. You start anticipating the worst, you get these really powerful physical symptoms, your heart races, you start sweating, and eventually you just start avoiding people and situations altogether. At its core, it's this deep, paralyzing fear of being judged negatively.
So if our own internal wiring and our anxiety can make connecting with people feel absolutely terrifying, what do we do about it? It can feel pretty hopeless, but here's the good news. Facing fear is a skill. And just like any other skill, it's something you can actually learn, using techniques that are backed by a ton of research. This right here, this is the whole problem. It is completely natural to want to avoid the things that scare you. Of course it is. But here's the trap. Every single time you avoid something, you're sending a message back to your brain that says, "Whew, that was dangerous. Good thing we ran away." You're reinforcing the fear, making it bigger and stronger for next time. The only way to break that cycle is to prove to your brain that you can handle it.
And the most effective, most studied way to do that is a method called exposure therapy. Now, the key words here are gradually and safely. This is not about just jumping into the deep end of the pool. It's the exact opposite. It's about taking small, manageable steps to systematically teach your brain that the thing you're so afraid of isn't actually a threat. You are literally rewiring your fear response.
And here's the basic recipe for how it works. First, you set a clear goal. Why are you even doing this? Get specific. Then, and this is the secret sauce, you build your fear ladder. You break that big scary thing down into tiny steps, from the least scary thing you can think of to the most. Then, you just start at the bottom rung. You do that one small thing, over and over, until the anxiety starts to fade. And finally, and this is so important, you have to reinforce your own courage. Acknowledge what you did, celebrate the win, no matter how small. You are building a brand new muscle. Okay, so once we start building that muscle of bravery, and our inner world begins to feel a little bit safer, how do we apply that to our relationships? It's time to stock our relationship toolkit with some practical frameworks for building better connections. First up, Boundaries. And I really want you to pay attention to this definition because it's so often misunderstood. A boundary is not about controlling other people. It is a guideline you create to control your own response. It's about you deciding what's okay for you. So instead of saying, you can't talk to me like that, a boundary sounds like, if this conversation becomes disrespectful, I am going to end it. See the shift? The power is with you and your actions.
Next up in the toolkit is a really popular one you've probably heard of, the 5 love languages. The basic idea is that we all tend to express and receive love in different ways. Maybe for you, hearing someone say, I appreciate you, those words of affirmation, is what really matters. But for your partner, the most loving thing you can do is an act of service, like taking care of a chore for them. It can be a helpful way to understand why you might feel like you're not on the same page.
However, and this is a pretty big however, we have to be honest here. From a scientific standpoint, the evidence for this theory is pretty weak. Research just doesn't really support the idea that we each have one primary language, or that matching styles automatically leads to a better relationship. So it's probably best to think of it as a helpful conversation starter, a tool for discussion, not a hard and fast scientific rule.
So, we've gone all the way from our deep-seated attachment blueprints to the skills for facing our fears, and finally to the tools we can use to communicate better. We've seen how our past shapes us, for sure, but also how we have the power to take action in new ways, right now. And that leaves us with one final question to think about. Knowing your own blueprint, and with these tools in hand, what will you choose to build?